Well, welcome back into another episode of the Downline podcast. I'm Jamie Trussell. I have the privilege of being a pastor out here in the Austin area at Redeemer Dripping Springs and still serving Downline Ministries, joined today by one of my really good friends, Mr. Barrett Jones, former Downline alumni, former NFL player, and unfortunately former star at the University of Alabama. Barrett, thanks for joining us.
Wow, that's the first time I've ever heard you call me a star. So that's very nice of you, and I appreciate that.
That's the first and only time.
Thank you. Well, in Alabama, I just tell people, they ask, kind of ask you, and I just say 4-1. Like, that's kind of my identity. That's what we're against Auburn, and that one really hurts. By the way,
yeah,
it really hurts to be 4-1 because of before it was legal to pay players. You guys went and bought the best quarterback money could buy in Cam Newton, which, hey, honestly, worth every penny. I'm sure you would agree.
I'm
probably underpaid.
First of all, I'm not even going to take that bait because the total for the Alabama roster that season probably broke the NFL salary cap.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
I mean, honestly, I was thinking about this. Cam Newton in today's market on NIL, I bet he would fetch $2 or $3 million. I mean, easily.
Oh, it'd be more than that. It'd be more than that for sure. For sure.
Well, anyway, thanks for having me.
Here at Downline, we to see a restoration of biblical discipleship in through the local church. The podcast here serves to help people faithfully walk with Jesus while pouring their lives into others. And Barrett, this is, no flattery, but I think you really are a great example of that. I had the privilege of serving as an elder with you during my time at Harvest Church in Memphis and just being friends and even seeing and talking with you about your recent involvement there in the high school ministry. How, just to kind of launch in to kind of where you are today, give people a little bit of a backdrop of kind of your post-NFL career and you're going through Downline and how that maybe changed some of your perspective and what you're involved in now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll even go back a bit further and just say that for anyone not familiar with me, which is probably many people, I grew up in Memphis and like Jamie said, I went to Alabama, played football there in the NFL for 3.5 years or so, moved back here, got married pretty quickly and not too quickly in a good pace, but met a girl quickly, got married, and now we have 3 kids. But along the way, starting off, I had really great parents who did a fantastic job of preaching the gospel to me, showing me modeling what it looked like to love Christ. I have a great dad who's awesome. He's an elder at Harvest also, and he's a great guy. He's a character, but he's a great guy. And so I've really can't remember a time, honestly, where I didn't hear the gospel on a regular basis and came to the Lord as a young kid. And as I grew, was grateful the Lord protected me from a lot of trouble maybe in college, was just really focused on football and got very involved with Campus Crusade at the time. Now it's Crew in college. But then when I got to the NFL, I met a guy, his name is John Sullivan, and he was one of the first guys to really kind of explain the vision of discipleship to me. I'd heard it. I was also discipled some by Steve Tucker growing up. So I'd heard a lot of this stuff, but it's just kind of that moment where you're kind of ready to totally understand and get the picture. And John actually was teaching me a lot of the stuff that had been taught to him by Herb Hodges, where some of the Downline material comes from. And so he kind of laid it out for me in St. Louis when I got drafted by the Rams, of just kind of the vision of discipleship and multiplication, the Great Commission. And I just remember for the first time kind of understanding like, wow, okay, like I fully get this now, or maybe not fully, but I really understand the vision of a big part of what our purpose is as Christians. And so that really stuck with me, started to really grow in that way, not just in my own personal walk, but trying to grow to get equipped to being able to make disciples. And when I moved back, started meeting with some people, but really, really wanted to be even better equipped to make disciples. And so I just got married. I think it was 17, 18 maybe when I did it, and or maybe 18, 19, one of those. And I asked my wife, like, hey, what did you think about going through Downline? And we did it. And it was a great experience for us. I encourage anybody who is listening to this, maybe you're engaged or something, or you just got married. People told us this, do it before you have kids, because it was a great experience for us. I can't imagine us doing it now together. In fact, I don't think it would be possible really to do it together for us in our current stage. We have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 9-month-old. But it was awesome. It was very transformational, even though some of the stuff I'd heard before, I haven't been in church my whole life. There was a lot of stuff I hadn't heard. And it also just gave me a great, succinct playbook for things to teach. And I took great notes, but also the resources available to go back and watch later. I've probably spent more time in Downline after I got out of Downline, even than the classes I was in, because I've rewatched so many videos in the library. So this is a random plug of just saying, if you're out there and you're leading a discipleship group and you're like, man, what do I teach? Like, you can literally get on the Downline website and sort a passage, type it in, and it will show you every single teacher that's taught it at Downline. There's a good chance you'll have a choice between Jamie and Kenan and Ronnie and maybe 5 other guys. And other than, maybe picking Jamie, you really can't go wrong there. So it's been a great resource for me. And yeah, I'm an elder at Harvest, been an elder there for 2.5 years, been going there really on and off since the very beginning, but joined when I moved back to Memphis in 2016, and love Harvest. Got a couple groups that I meet with on a regular basis, as well as some involvement in the high school ministry. So a little bit all over, and my wife says maybe I'm too much all over, but I love making disciples.
Well, she's correct.
Yeah, I love making disciples, and I love what I do. I'm a financial advisor, by the way. This is my office of where I am. So I also have a full-time job, and I used to be friends with Jamie when he lived here. Now I'm still bitter at him for leaving, but I don't have anyone to play golf with on a random Wednesday afternoon right now, so it's hard. But anyway, that's the summary.
Hey, but you have more money now because I never paid for anything.
That's true. I am definitely fuller in wallet, so I'm able to give more money to
us ministry guys.
I'm a better rope holder now.
I took a class in seminary about how to mooch effectively and play golf.
There you go. That's a class that is
I could
priceless.
teach that class.
It's a price that doesn't need to just be for seminary. It needs to be for a lot of, especially
that's a good point.
Young guys of how to really mooch on golf. But you got to do it in a classy way, and you did that always. You always offer.
Hey, well, you actually mentioned something that I don't know that enough people either remember or think about, but yeah, once you go through the Downline Institute, that the resource is yours, like free of charge for the rest of your life. And so there's an entire catalog of teachings that you can continually access as you're trying to teach people and walk.
I think you have to pay $25 one time or something, and you get all classes ever. So that's definitely a worthy investment too. That's a great deal. In fact, y'all need to make that annual. Just get some. I'm a finance guy. We got to get the revenue streams rolling. But
our revenue stream. You donating more money.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And people subscribing to this podcast. In fact, I've got a donor who's anybody that subscribes and follows. He'll give $10 for anybody that does from now to the end of the year. So there's a plug to jump on and follow and give us 5 stars. Hey, I was reading some stuff. I mean, I can't even believe this stuff's true about you. All right. 3-time BCS national champion. Unfortunately, I knew that. Alabama has a lot of national titles that aren't real. Your 3 are real. You got the Outland Trophy in 11, Remington in 12, Warfel Trophy in 11, Jim Parker Trophy. I've never even heard of that. In 11, you're unanimous All-American, consensus All-American, 13 All-American in 2010, and 3-time first team All-SEC. I'm going to be honest. There are a lot of guys walking around. I'm 41. We watch football on Saturdays and kind of fantasize about like, man, if only that could have been my life. But you kind of lived it, right? And you can speak into just honestly, what was that like? Just kind of like every football loving guy's dream. And you walked that road.
Yeah, well, I think a couple things. First of all, a funny one is that I, too, have never heard of the Jim Parker Trophy. And that every time people read that, they say that. And when I say I've never heard of it, and this is a just funny aside. So understand when you're hearing this that I don't take myself very seriously in all those trophies. But like I've literally never gotten a communication from them. I don't have a trophy. Like I didn't know someone read that off one time and I said, I did not win the Jim Parker Trophy. I've never heard of that. And we went and looked it up, and I did win it. But no one even told me. They never even told me. I don't have a trophy. I don't have a certificate. I got nothing. They just declared it, and they didn't even tell me. We call
that fake news. Fake news.
I think it's the Touchdown Club of Columbus, Ohio, that gives it out, and I guess I won it one year, and they didn't tell me. It's just anyway. Sorry. So, what was it like? First of all, I'll say on the practical side, the physical side, maybe it was very hard, and it was a lot of work. And it's one of those things where I look back and I'm like, wow, if I knew what it was going to take going in, would I do it again today? Like, I don't know. I don't know if I don't know if I'm tough enough, because it was such a grind. It was very fun, and I'm glad. Well, I shouldn't, honestly, I don't want to lie. It's fun afterwards, and it was good to have that accomplishment at the time, the day in and the day out, when you're winning that much. And so we literally, the 4 years I played, we won 3 out of 4 years. So it's just, you can imagine, we had so many big games, so many big moments, so many intense practices, and this. When you create a culture like that, it's very hard to sustain. And so you got to just be able to grind all the time. And so, yeah, I'm glad we did it. And I made a lot of good friends, but it was really, really hard. And there's not really a secret to why we won. We had really good players, first of all, but we just worked really hard. We worked really, really hard. We did things that the guys would never do now, which is probably smart. We probably maybe worked too hard physically, but it was a grind. So the more important part, though, I would say it would be spiritually, and that for a long time, that's what I wanted. That was my number one goal. I was a believer, but I thought so much more about football than I did my faith. And everything I did in life was geared towards being able to be a good athlete. And even in high school at the end, I knew I was going to play somewhere, and I just really, really wanted to be the best, and, gave up a lot, sacrificed a lot, but it certainly became a huge idol in my life. And getting to Alabama, that only exacerbated that. Alabama is probably the most idolatrous football state. It's got to be in the Union. There's just it is, Jamie, you know this, but when you're a kid, you kind of have to declare if you're Alabama or Auburn. It's just a huge deal. Who you are, it's a part of your identity for most people in the state. It's really religion. It's the most important thing in most people's week. I don't say that lightly.
Auburn. I grew up in Auburn and went to Auburn. Didn't play for Auburn, and I certainly didn't win the Jim Parker Trophy, but everything you're saying is spot on. I mean, it's from the day 365. Your emotions are more controlled by football than they are by Jesus.
No doubt. And that was me. And obviously you can imagine being in it, and walking around campus. And I like that. I like that people saw me and they said, that guy's somebody, that's Barrett Jones. He plays for Alabama, and even the students, and asked me, we're going to win this weekend. It was fun. That part of it was fun, and it's hard for it not to become a big part of your identity, especially if you're not totally grounded spiritually, which I don't want to over dramatize it. I mean, I never had I was going to church and reading my Bible, but it was just, I don't think I really saw it clearly until maybe a little bit later on. And I have a long version of the story, but the short version is I redshirted my first year. My second year, I became a starter, 2009. We won the national championship. We beat Texas. We beat Tim Tebow in Florida in the SEC championship, and then we beat Colt McCoy in Texas in the national championship. For a long time, that had been my dream, was to win a national championship. When I was a freshman in high school, the greatest football game I'd ever seen up to that point was Texas USC. Vince Young against Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, Lindale White. Yeah. And at the very end, Vince Young runs around 4th and 2 with a couple seconds left, scores, Texas wins. This confetti falls down on Vince Young. And I remember thinking as a freshman, man, that's my goal. I want to do that. I want to hold the crystal ball up. We used to have this beautiful crystal trophy, Waterford Crystal. And I was like, someday I want to do that. And so fast forward, we win the national championship, beat Texas at the Rose Bowl 5 years later, almost to the day after I saw that. And I have this great moment where I get to hold the trophy, and I've got a great picture of it where the confetti is falling down on me. And, it was awesome. It was a great moment. And I passed it on. And when I got back to my hotel room though later that night, I felt this sense of overwhelming emptiness of kind of man, I'm 19. I really had 3 goals in life. I wanted to be a starter, an All-American, and win a national championship. And I did them all. And I was 19 years old, and I was kind of like, okay, what do I do now? And that kind of kicked off a period where the Lord really started to work in my life and revealed to me that nothing was going to ever satisfy me but my relationship with Jesus Christ. One of my favorite Bible verses is John 6:35. It says, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never hunger. He who believes in me will never thirst. And I think that verse during that period was a verse that I really dwelled on a lot, and started to really understand what that practically meant for my life. That's something we say in church growing up, oh yeah, only Jesus can fulfill you, or oh yeah, want to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. But then I think when the rubber meets the road and you you kind of taste that a little bit, and you realize like, wow, nothing really ever is going to satisfy me but Christ. And probably for a lot of listeners, you've had a moment like that maybe in your life, or if you haven't, you probably will have a moment where, you work so hard for something and there's, this improper place in your heart where you accomplish it. And you're like, man, I did it. Like now, now what? And your heart just has this emptiness. And it's cool. Like the more I've lived and learned, like God designs us that way, to continually draw us back to him, to where we feel that emptiness. And by the way, it's not that you shouldn't accomplish good things. We won 2 more after that. And it was just so different for me because it was so fun to win those, but they weren't part of who I was. It wasn't like I was chasing my identity. I didn't need that to be more whole. It was in a proper place. Usually, I'm not saying I fixed it perfectly, but it was something I was mindful of before the game was like, this is going to define the rest of my life of what happens in this field. The rest of my eternal destiny has already been defined by what Jesus did on the cross. And so understanding that and letting that really permeate your life, I think is something that unfortunately we have to do every single day. And that's, to finish up my mini sermon, is the biggest thing I get on my disciple guys about is like, hey, unfortunately, you read the Bible and you read all these stories about, people falling away from the Lord and there's this constant cycle. Like you're no different and we're no different. Our hearts are constantly looking for other things to chase. And so we've got to preach the gospel to ourselves every single morning and get to the word, spend time in prayer and allow God to mold us and shape us and remind us that nothing will ever satisfy us because there's a reason we're constantly compared to sheep. We're very dumb and we will forget if we don't remind ourselves very often.
No, that's a good word. And it's proof that you can take the football player out of the Baptist church, but you can't take the Baptist church out of the football player. So that was well said. And I was just wondering, Barrett, how do you think that
I'm not sure the different layers of what that means, but I like that.
Hey, I'm wondering, as the confetti's falling, how do you think that compares to this coffee mug right here when you move to Texas and win the 3rd grade championship over the entire city, your first season? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when you get up to like a precipice like that in year 1, there's a lot of danger around the corner. So you kind of set an expectation for yourself and for your family. And I'm just frankly a little bit worried to see if you'll actually be able to sustain it. We'll see if you will. But yeah, I think it's very concerning to be able to do that. But I'll just to snap back at it. I'll give you real quick. Just it was pretty good. That was a good.
That's a similar picture to what I just showed.
Very similar. Very similar.
Probably about the same amount of people watch those games.
Definitely, maybe more watch your game. Texas people love football.
Hey, you won 3 out of 4 championships. I was just curious as you were talking, though, one of the 4 that you didn't win, did you remember who won that one?
I do remember that. That was the aforementioned. Yeah. Have they gotten stripped of that yet? It wouldn't surprise me. That I don't.
It was Auburn. I know you can't say it, but it was Auburn.
It was the Cal College, the other town. Oh, and it was honestly a great game. We were it's for people that are not big college football fans, and I won't go into too much because I feel like if you hate football, you're like, this episode, what is going on?
Nobody hates football.
We were up 24-0 against Auburn, and we call it the Cam back, or they do maybe. And Cam led them back, and they won 28-27. I was actually injured that game, I will say, at a high ankle sprain.
Probably why y'all lost.
And I was supposed to block Nick Fairley the entire game, and there was a huge moment where Nick Fairley, we were driving in to score to go up 31-0, and Nick Fairley sacked on our quarterback, Greg McElroy, on the 5-yard line and recovered the football. It was a huge play in the game. I hold myself personally responsible. My ankle really, it's really, I have a hard, it's the only film I have a hard time watching because it's still a little bit painful. But it drove us on to back-to-back after that.
That's right. Yes. Well, we get credit for your other 2 championships then too. Hey, in 2013, maybe 2013, you're a 4th round draft pick of the St. Louis Rams. You go from college to the NFL. Take us inside of that kind of culture and environment and the pressure points of trying to walk with Jesus in that type of setting.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, got drafted, moved to St. Louis. It's a weird feeling, by the way, when you're sitting there watching TV and literally you're going to move to one of 32 cities and you're like watching, like, okay, the TV's going to tell me in a second. I mean, you get a phone call like a minute before, but it's like a very bizarre. It's a great functional way to trust the Lord of like, hey, I've literally got no idea like where you want me to go. And I had 3 or 4 teams I thought might draft me, and the Rams were not even one of them. So it's just funny how that happens. And so there we go.
So who called you? What's that phone call like? You're
Jeff
your name's not
Fisher,
called.
an Auburn guy.
Okay.
So Auburn people everywhere. Yeah,
The
he
head
called
coach
me
called you.
and it was the St. Louis area code, and I was like, "Wow, the Rams are picking soon." And they just said, "Hey, we're about to draft you. Excited to have you." And here's the coach, and Les Snead, the general manager, was on there, and we just chatted it up about all the great things were going to happen. That none of them came true for me, but yeah, it was a great moment, and kind of the culmination of a lot of hard work. So, but getting the NFL, it's an odd place. I mean, the culture in St. Louis was so drastically different than where I was in Alabama. I mean, NFL cultures are always going to be a little different, but the Rams culture was so chill and relaxed, very players coach. We weren't good, and we lost, I think, 9 games my first year, and I think I lost 5 my whole time in Alabama or something. So it was very hard to deal with that, and I think guys didn't care very much that we lost, which bothered me. It's just a very different, after the game you lose and guys are in the shower talking about where they're going to, go out afterwards. And you're like, okay, y'all don't care that much. If we lost at Alabama, it was like, we were devastated. We were all going to just kind of go hide in a hole. But faith wise, it's a weird lifestyle because obviously you play on Sundays and, it's hard to really meet a lot of people, especially I wasn't a big going out clubbing kind of guy. So that was not my scene. There's really kind of 2 big groups in the NFL. You got the young guys that are, pretty wild generally. I'm generalizing here. There's obviously some exceptions to this. And then you got the married guys that are a little more chill. And so I tended to hang out with more of the married people because I was not living the same lifestyle as the young guys. But it was good. I had some good cultures in different spots. And, there's an FCA presence in several of the teams I was on, like different Bible studies and a lot of chaplains at certain spots. And so kind of depends team by team what that looks like. And I was on 4 different teams, so I got to experience some different ones. But I really enjoyed it somewhat. I'm glad I did it. I don't miss it at all. I 0% miss playing the NFL. It was such a grind and moving around to different cities, and you're on a team picks you up in the middle of the year. And again, let me just give perspective, very first world, very grateful that I was in that spot to be able to do that. But, life now, fulfillment wise, even obviously apart from the Lord, it's so much greater. Right? It's hard. You get older too. You're just getting beat up, and you're grinding at football practice every day, and just kind of do it all for money mostly. And it's I don't know. It's very different. And look, nothing against it. And I'm sure if I had been more successful, maybe I would have liked it better. But I had this feeling. I remember getting cut for the last time, and I was actually at my gate at the airport because you get a weekend off before. I thought I made the team. It was an hour from the deadline, and my flight was about to leave from Philadelphia, and I got a call from their general manager, and he called me and right before the deadline and said, "Hey, we made a last minute decision. We're going to actually let you go and keep this other guy." And I said, "Okay." And so I hopped on the plane and remember the feeling on the way home of just kind of thinking like, I feel like I'm done for some reason. I just have this feeling of like, this is it. And I had a couple, like tryouts that I could have gone to and stuff. I don't know. I'm not trying to make it seem like I was going to be this great player because obviously I'd already gotten cut 3 times, but I just really felt a peace about being done and being ready to move on and do something else. And I'm glad I did because I met my wife about probably 2 months after that and we went on our first date and got married about a year and 3 months after that. And, it's the rest is history. So I'm grateful for the way it worked out, and ended up taking 2 jobs. Initially worked for ESPN for 5 years, and also worked as a financial advisor, which is what I'm doing now still. And so was working very hard I'm still working very hard, but I was working 2 jobs for 5 years, which was very hard. And once we started having kids, when that second one rolled along, kind of realized that was probably not doable to travel for 17 weekends in a row to call a game. And also have a full-time job. So that's a little bit about how it went.
Hey, thanks for sharing that. Seriously, I got 2 questions. One, even as an Auburn fan, you have to begrudgingly acknowledge the greatness of Nick Saban, right? That there's a sustained reality of culture and success that's really unprecedented, honestly. Maybe Bill Belichick in the NFL, but I think I asked because there's some realities of organizational cultures that I think are transferable to discipleship principles, right? And so
1,000%.
what was it about Coach Saban and the culture he built at Alabama and the sustained success? Like, give us, two or three insights into something you took away about kind of maintaining some of those principles even into your faith.
Well, I've spoken on this before, so I've got some hopefully good ones, but I think it's super applicable, and I use it all the time. And maybe I get too Baptist with it, as you said, but I love
Hey, I
thinking
love the
about it.
Baptist.
I do think there's some leadership, principles and life principles that translate all over the board. And so the biggest one, kind of starting with encompassing the whole thing, is that Nick Saban always talked about the process. He was big on the process, right? That was his thing, is, the process, the process. Anytime you listen to his interview, he says it, 10 times, is the process. And so, maybe you've heard that before, maybe you haven't, maybe you have no clue what I'm talking about, but, to understand what the process is and how it applies to our lives, is the idea of the process is that most people in life, if they do even have goals, which some do, they really just spend a lot of time fixating on like the results. Okay, here's what I want. Here's what I want to be. I want to be a champion. I want to win a national championship. Okay, which it's good to have goals. The process does not mean that you don't make goals, but the process means that, hey, you make a goal, but your focus day in and day out doesn't need to just be on fixating about that goal. It needs to be on every single day figuring out, like, how do I get better? And I'm right now I'm talking football, but I'll get to the spiritual bridge in a second. But like, how do I, get a little bit better? And even breaking it down further, he would say, like, hey, every play has a life and history of its own. Like, every single play you run, just lock in on that play of what you need to do. Don't worry about the score, the situation, who's against you, whatever. Like, just focus on that play and focus on whatever the technique you need to do on that play. Do that and get a little bit better on that play. And in practice, same thing. Every play, every rep, every period, just breaking it down of like, hey, how can I get a little bit better? And within that, the most applicable thing to the Christian life is this, is that you set a standard for yourself, okay? So most people, most human beings live their lives in constant comparison to others. They're constantly just, their brains are like, oh, look, I'm better looking than that guy, or oh, look, I'm richer than him, or oh, I'm smarter than that guy, or whatever. Like, you just constantly are walking around comparing yourself. And that's kind of like, you're just ranking yourself in your head of how you compare to everyone else. And Nick Saban says, hey, forget about other people. It's not about them. It's about you. You set a standard for yourself. Who can you be? What's your maximum potential? And you look to that standard always as to what you can do. It doesn't matter. You don't need to outwork the guy next to you. You don't need to outwork the guy on the other team. You need to work as hard as you can work. Set a standard for yourself and live your life to that standard. Obviously, so many correlations there is that, hey, as a Christian, it's not about focusing on other people or being more holy than the guy next to you. It's about, hey, we've got a standard. We know our standard. That's the problem. That's right. A lot of guys don't know their standard. They don't. I wanted to fill in the blanks for them. Like, they don't know the standard of what they're trying to live to. We, as a Christian, we know the standard. The standard is Jesus Christ, and so we're never going to reach the standard, obviously. But that's the standard that we need to compare ourselves to, and obviously that will show us that we're going to fall short, and we need God's grace, and we need to rely on Him. There's a lot of layers that can come off that, but I love that. I love that idea, is that, hey, you got to focus on the standard, and then the process too of the Christian daily life. I love this, like, hey, all the things like, oh, I want to do this, and I want to do all these big things for God, and like, all that's great, and I hope that we all have those dreams that the Holy Spirit puts in our heart. But like, focusing every day on the process of, am I being faithful and obedient to what God calls me to do in this 15-minute period? Like, as God brings this guy across my face, am I being faithful to this guy? Instead of just thinking like, oh, I want to be this great Christian person, like down the road, I hope I'm mature. Like, well, yeah, that's good to hope for, but like, how do you get there? Like, what does that look like?
Right.
And again, I don't want to make it sound like a workspace thing where I've got to get there. But as a Christian, there is some element to being faithful and obedient, where obviously we're not saving ourselves in any capacity, but we're being obedient to what God calls us to do. And so focusing on being faithful every single day and focusing on the process instead of the results, I think is just so applicable to what we can do as believers.
Well, we could take the language of the process and, put a theological term of just sanctification beside it, which
absolutely
is which is our process of becoming more and more Christ-like, which I love. One of great friends and a guy, Dr. Cole Huffman, who's now in Nashville, he always says, God is not opposed, grace is not opposed to effort. It's only opposed to earning. And there's a reality there. We do cooperate with the Spirit to grow in Christ-likeness, which is, I think, something that you're really highlighting there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, I'm sure you heard this, Jamie, but I hear people all the time that say, like, man, I'm just like, I'm not, I don't feel like I'm walking with the Lord. Like I'm not feeling like into it. I feel like I'm far from God. Like I'm not, which a lot of it's very feelings based of like, I'm just not feeling like close with the Lord, which by the way, I'm not minimizing that at all. That's a very real thing. And there's seasons and ebbs and flows and all that. But usually the first question I ask them is like, hey, like, tell me about your time in the Word. Like, are you spending meaningful time in the Word and meaningful time in prayer with God? And usually the answer is no, like, I just haven't felt like it as much. So it's not, which obviously I get the Spirit placed that in your heart. So I don't want to overwork space it like you're saying, but there is an element to like, hey, like, if you want to be close to the Lord, like, you got to spend time with Him. Like, just kind of like if you're feeling distant from your wife, like, have you taken her on a date lately? Have you created an environment where you can spend some intimate time just one-on-one amidst the craziness of life? Like, you gotta do that. Like, it doesn't just happen. You don't just like trip and fall and like, get to know the Lord better. Like, you gotta be intentional, especially in many of us probably are in crazy seasons of your life where there's a lot of demands on your time. You gotta intentionally block off time in your day to make sure you can commune with the Lord. And so if you're like, I just can't do that, I'm just too busy. Well, then you gotta drop something else, because nothing's more important than that one-on-one intentional time you spend with the Lord. So I just think that sometimes we maybe can err on the side of thinking like, oh yeah, well, it's not about me, it's about grace, which again it's definitely true. But like we participate in sanctification by intentionally blocking off time to spend with the Lord, to allow Him to shape us and mold us more into the image of His Son. Anyway, I'm very passionate about that.
Well, rightly so. Hey, let me ask you this. Get to closing. Who's the greatest NFL coach you played for and why? And what did you take from him that you feel like you can bring into the Christian life and pass on to others?
That's a great question. And I would say the best coach I played for, without a doubt, which was a very short time in the NFL. The greatest coach was Nick Saban, obviously. But in the NFL, I played for Mike Tomlin for like a couple months, and I really respected him. I just think he's a great leader of men. He is clear, decisive, takes the blame for things that go wrong, gives the credit to other people. He's a man. He walks to the front door on issues. If there's an issue that was, kind of murmuring through the team or people felt awkward, he just hit it head on. He addressed it and said, hey guys, I've heard that like people are unhappy about this. Like, here's the deal. This is what we're doing. Like, here's why we made this decision. We're going with it. This is what the organization thinks. We're rolling. Like he just handled everything like a man. And I really love that. I think there's a lot of takeaways, but I think that's something even in Christian relationships that I have applied of like, I think sometimes we're scared to hurt people's feelings so much that we don't tell the truth. That obviously there's a balance here of, we all probably know that guy that tells the truth, and maybe not always in love. You got to do it in love, but there's a time to come to the front door to your brother and to say, hey, here's what I'm noticing. Like, here's what I'm seeing in your life. Like, I love you and I'm praying for you. And I feel like that's not right. Or, hey, like, I think maybe it seems like maybe there's a problem with us. Like, is there something I've done? Like, let's just talk it out, where let me just address it head on. Like, what are you feeling about how this is going on? Let's talk about it and address it so we can be right in relationship before each other. And so I think, and that's something even like in work, there's always tricky situations in work where things like that come up. And that's been a good applicable thing for me to just walk through the front door and say, hey, I feel like you seem a little off. There's something going on. Like, just let's talk about it and handle it and be honest with each other about how we're feeling. And that'll help us move on and continue to glorify the Lord.
No, that's a fantastic point. And there's an old leadership adage that clarity is kindness and ambiguity breeds assumption. And those 100% play into relational dynamics all the time.
Yeah, it does. And it's hard to be a leader. That's in everything. It's really hard because, the spotlight's on you. You've got to work hard. People are watching you, and like it's hard to step up and make a decision, knowing that there's probably people that are going to be unhappy with it. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's definitely a place for that principle in our churches and our community groups, and there's infinite applications
Mhm.
to not being afraid to lead and hopefully being spirit led and doing that, but being able to be bold and stand up and reject passivity. So I love that. It's certainly not something that I do perfectly, by the way. It's just an area where I've many times stumbled in, but I try to try.
Well, hey, man, I really appreciate your time. Obviously, love you as a friend, but I think this will be a blessing to a lot of folks. And just so thankful that you proved to be the exception to the rule, that the only thing that Alabama and Auburn fans have in common is that neither one of them graduated from the University of Alabama. So,
Well,
hey, thank you.
I did graduate. I did. I have a master's too, so I'm a double fan. But I'm just glad. I hope that when you moved to Texas, you found a way to cure the snap hook, because there were times where it was very dicey, where we were constantly in the left woods just hunting for balls. So I hope somehow, I hope there's a strong wind in Texas that keeps your balls in the fairway. The kind of wind out of the left. That's your favorite kind of wind.
There's a great day in the summer of 2024 in North Alabama at a golf course called Turtle Point, when a statement made by one Barrett Jones a few months earlier to me said that I was physically incapable of beating him at golf. And on that day, Barrett, I can't exactly remember what happened, except that I beat you straight up.
You were dialed in, and I was lost. But yes, I do. That's true. The Lord taught me some humility, so I'll never say it again. You have beaten me once. Hopefully, it will never happen again.
Well, I'll say this.
I'm like 187-1, but it did happen.
Well, that's generous, but Alabama's never counted championships accurately, so it rubbed off on you while you were there.
That's probably true. We definitely have some questionable ones. I wish we'd get rid of those, but it's too late. We have too many shirts and jerseys, and
Too many shirts.
You can't undo all that marketing if we just gave up.
There are too many Walmart clearance aisles with that gear available.
There's no doubt. There's a lot of Walmart clearance aisles, and if Kmart was still around, might have trickled down there too.
Kmart. I loved Kmart right next to the Piggly Wiggly growing up in Auburn.
You probably Walmart was probably a big place in Auburn. There's not a whole lot going on there, so I bet it was kind of a good meeting point. Like, hey, meet me at the Walmart. Except, were you in a town where they called it the Walmarts? Because if you get to North Alabama, if you have any relatives, you call it everything you add an S to. Meet me at Walmart.
Listen, North Alabama could secede and become its own state.
They probably should versus
No,
LA.
we don't claim them. We don't claim them.
Yeah. Well,
hey, man, appreciate your time, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
Love you too, man. Appreciate you.